If you're visiting the channel for the first time, watch the content, check out the analysis, and if things make sense, you can subscribe and drop a like too. Let's move towards the case. The annual fair in Vicheres was supposed to fund school and church renovations. On the evening of July 25, 1993, about 500 people filled a small village in the Vallée d'Abondance, a quiet stretch of alpine countryside along a river that feeds into Lake Geneva. Families milled about. Children ran between stalls. Adults worked the kitchens and the games. Serge Blanc was savoring time with his kids after a long work week. His wife, Marie-Claude, helped prepare food. Their 7-year-old daughter, Jessica, played with the other children, drifting in and out of sight, the way kids do in a place where everyone knows everyone and locks are an afterthought. At some point, Jessica wandered away from the group. A man appeared beside her. He spoke to her, guided her toward a car, and drove off. The whole thing took seconds. Nobody intervened. Nobody screamed. In a village that small, strangers stand out. But this man was not exactly a stranger. People in the valley knew him by a nickname. They called him the Legionnaire. By the time Serge and Marie-Claude noticed Jessica was missing, they assumed she was with other children. Minutes passed, then longer. A creeping dread replaced the casual assumption. They started asking around, checking every corner of the fairground, calling her name. Other villagers joined the search. 2 of them came forward with a detail that turned the search into a hunt. They had seen Jessica climb into the Legionnaire's car. The locals knew this man lived somewhere in the woods near Neuvecelle, a commune a few kilometers away. They did not know the exact location of his shack, but they grabbed rifles and set out into the dark forest. Serge ran to a phone booth and called the police. Around 1 in the morning, a group of officers and villagers located a crude cabin deep in the trees. The man was not inside. They found him a short distance away, shirtless, his skin smeared with blood. When asked to explain it, he said he had tripped and fallen. Inside the cabin, officers recovered a small earring, the kind a child would wear. They kept searching the property. Under a tarp in the garden, they found Jessica's body. The man covered in blood was Michel Sydor. He was 63 years old. He had already killed twice before. Michel Sydor was born on September 8, 1929, in Corbeil-Essonnes, a town south of Paris. He grew up during the German occupation of France, an era of deprivation and instability that shaped an entire generation. But the war alone does not explain what Michel became. From a young age, he tortured and killed animals, a behavioral pattern that criminal psychology now recognizes as one of the strongest early indicators of future violence against humans. He drifted into petty crime as a teenager, alienating those around him. He was an outsider by choice and by temperament. He also began constructing an alternate identity. He told people he was a former legionnaire, a soldier of the French Foreign Legion. The story was a complete fabrication, but he repeated it so often and with such conviction that it became his defining trait. People called him the Legionnaire long before they knew what he was actually capable of. He never served a day in the military, which is probably a mercy. The idea of Michel Sydor with military training and access to automatic weapons is not a comfortable thought. The first murder in 1950, as France was still rebuilding from wartime devastation, Michel committed his first known killing. He murdered a sex worker following a dispute. The details of this crime are sparse, not because they were lost to history, but because the justice system at the time did not consider the victim important enough to document thoroughly. Despite extensive research, her name does not appear in any available records. She was killed, and then she was erased. Michel was convicted, but the sentence was shockingly light. 5 years of hard labor. The victim's profession gave the court permission to treat her death as something less than a full murder. In the 1950s, and arguably still, a woman in sex work could be seen as partially responsible for the violence inflicted upon her. The sentence told Michel something dangerous, that certain lives were disposable, and that killing carried manageable consequences. He served his time and walked free. After his release, Michel relocated to the Pas-de-Calais region in northern France, a rural area of mining towns and farmland. He found work doing agricultural labor and forestry jobs. And in 1958, he married a woman named Gilberte Boudry. The couple settled in Toisville, a village of fewer than 300 people near Bethune. Gilberte had 2 children with him. Nobody in Toisville knew they were living next to a convicted killer. Michel worked as a miner's assistant, hauling ore carts through the tunnels, brutal physical work that left most men too exhausted to do anything but sleep. Michel still found the energy to beat his wife and children. He also began writing sexually explicit letters to young girls in the area. Those letters were eventually discovered. Michel was fired from his mining job. Gilberty, perhaps seeing the exposure of the letters as the breaking point she needed, took the children and left. She moved back to her parents' home in Lens. Michel did not accept this. On the night of December 22nd, 1961, he drove to the home of Gilberty's parents. He carried a 9mm pistol. He entered the house and shot Gilberty in the head while her children watched. He then turned the gun on her father, Henri, and shot him as well. Henri survived. Despite his wounds, he reached for his hunting rifle and fired back, striking Michel. The hit forced Michel to flee. Henri managed to call for help, and the police arrested Michel the following day. Michel initially denied the shooting and then confessed. His defense was familiar. He called it a crime of passion. That phrase deserves scrutiny. The concept of a crime of passion suggests that love can motivate killing, that emotional intensity justifies lethal violence. It is a legal framework that has historically benefited men who murder women for leaving them. Think of anyone you genuinely love. If that person chose to walk away from you forever, would your response be to end their life? The question answers itself. What Michel felt was not love, it was ownership. And when his property tried to leave, he destroyed it. Michel was charged with murder and attempted murder and held in pre-trial detention. His trial took place in June 1964. He faced the death penalty, but his legal team pushed the crime of passion angle hard, hoping to reduce the sentence to 20 years. The court did not agree with the reduction, but it did not impose the maximum either. On June 26, 1964, Michel was sentenced to life imprisonment. Under French law at the time, life imprisonment carried a minimum term of 15 years. After that, a prisoner could apply for parole. In 1972, French President Georges Pompidou granted Michel Sydor a presidential pardon, reducing his life sentence to 20 years. Pompidou's record on clemency is worth noting here. This is the same president who pardoned Paul Touvier, a militia leader during the Vichy regime, who was later convicted of crimes against humanity for his role in deporting Jews during the occupation. Pompidou's use of the pardon power was, to put it mildly, inconsistent with public safety. With his sentence reduced, Michel became eligible for release. In 1978, after serving 17 years, he walked out of prison a free man. He was 49 years old. He had killed 2 people, beaten his wife and children, written sexual letters to minors, and tortured animals. The system handed him back to the public and wished him well. He moved to Haute-Savoie in the French Alps. The mountain air did nothing for Michel Sydor. He settled into his usual pattern almost immediately, becoming the local menace within months. In 1981, his neighbors caught him torturing animals again. He was charged with animal cruelty, but released. A year later, he was officially banned from the Haute-Savoie region, but nobody followed up. Nobody verified whether he actually left. He simply moved deeper into the woods, building a shack near Neuvecelle in the Vallée de Bondens. He scraped together a living by collecting scrap metal from waste disposal sites and doing odd jobs. He kept up the Legionnaire act, telling anyone who would listen about his fictitious military career. He was in constant conflict with his neighbors. He made racist remarks to a Lebanese man living nearby. On at least one occasion, he attempted to shoot at neighbors during disputes. The complaints piled up. Residents reported him to the authorities repeatedly. They reported the threats, the instability, the hostility. When Michel started writing sexually explicit letters to young girls again, the same thing that had exposed him in Pas-de-Calais years earlier, more complaints were filed. The authorities did nothing substantive. No arrest, no investigation into his past. No one connected the dots between the aging recluse in the woods and the convicted double murderer who had been pardoned out of a life sentence. The system failed at every checkpoint, and it kept failing until a child was dead. After his arrest on the night of July 25, 1993, Michel Sydor was taken into custody. The entire valley wanted him dead. Threats against his life were so credible that he had to be transferred to a different police station for his own protection. In the interrogation room, Michel offered an account of Jessica's death that was not just false, but grotesque. He claimed he arrived at the Vacheresse fair with no ill intent and bumped into Jessica by pure coincidence. According to him, the 7-year-old told him she was tired and that her parents were having He said he asked her whether she had ever had sexual intercourse, and she told him she had done it twice with a cousin. He claimed she followed him willingly to his cabin, initiated sexual contact by undressing herself, and then died accidentally by falling as she was leaving. The autopsy demolished every word of this story. Jessica had not consented to anything, a statement that should not even require making about a 7-year-old child. She had been and then beaten to death with a blunt object, most likely a rock. The entire assault, from abduction to murder, lasted approximately 30 minutes. On July 27, 1993, Michel was formally charged with kidnapping, murder, and of a minor under the age of 15, with the additional classification of repeat offender. He was placed in pre-trial detention. A female lawyer was appointed to represent him. He refused her services. He would only accept a male attorney. So in addition to being a triple murderer, a pedophile, and a racist, Michel Sydor was also a committed sexist. His replacement counsel was Georges Rimondi. Michel Sydor's case, alongside the concurrent case of Patrick Tissier, another repeat offender who had attacked a child, triggered a national reckoning. How had the justice system allowed known violent criminals to reoffend against children? How had presidential pardons and lax parole processes returned these men to society without monitoring? The public outrage was enormous. In 1994, France introduced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, giving judges the authority to impose an unlimited minimum sentence for the most severe convictions. Michel's trial opened on June 14, 1995, at the Annecy Assize Court. The courtroom was packed. Residents from across the valley made the trip. A large photograph of Jessica was displayed in front of the courthouse. Michel sat calmly, showing no remorse. True to form, he deflected blame onto the justice system itself. He told the court, "You should have kept me in prison, and I wouldn't have committed this murder." He was not wrong, but the statement was not an admission of guilt. It was an accusation designed to shift responsibility away from him and onto the institutions that released him. As the prosecution detailed the final 30 minutes of Jessica's life, Serge Blanc lost control. He grabbed a chair and hurled it at Michel. A police officer intervened, and the chair missed its target. On June 15, 1995, after less than 1 hour of deliberation, the jury convicted Michel Sydor and sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. He was transferred to Ensisheim's Central Prison, a facility reserved for France's most dangerous inmates, housing convicted killers and serial offenders including Guy Georges, Pierre Bourdain, and Francis Holm. His attorney, Rimondi, later reflected on the case with a single sentence: "I defended the worst of criminals for the worst of crimes." One question lingered after the sentencing: why did Michel not receive life without parole? The law had been available since 1994, a full year before his trial. The most likely explanation is that the court expected him to die in prison before ever reaching the end of his 30-year minimum. He was 65 at sentencing. He would not be eligible for release consideration until he was 95, but relying on actuarial probability is not the same as guaranteeing public safety, and given Michel's history of slipping through legal cracks, the decision carried risk. In March 2001, Serge and Marie-Claude Blanc joined a large silent march through Paris, organized to protest the justice system's leniency toward convicted pedophiles. The march drew families of victims from across France, including relatives of women murdered by Émile Louis. The Blancs spoke publicly about what Jessica's murder had done to their family. Serge had been working as a school bus driver. He quit. "At every stop I saw the image of my daughter getting on the bus," he said. "I couldn't take it anymore." Marie-Claude also changed careers. She took a job in a retirement home because she could no longer bear being around children. Jessica's older brother carried his own trauma. The family stopped taking vacations. They described themselves as permanently incomplete. In 2012, Michel Sydor, then 82 years old, filed a request for release on medical grounds. He cited heart problems and urinary incontinence. The request provoked fury in the Blanc family, and across the Haute-Savoie region, a petition to keep him incarcerated gathered thousands of signatures. Psychiatric and criminal experts unanimously assessed him as still dangerous, even at his age. On July 11, 2012, the Colmar Sentence Enforcement Court rejected the request. The court offered a compromise, transfer to a medical facility better suited to his condition. Michel refused and appealed. His appeal was dismissed on December 11, 2012. After that, he stopped fighting. Michel Sydor died on November 1, 2014, at the age of 85. He spent his final years in the same prison cell where France kept its worst. Jessica's parents never stopped their advocacy. As of the most recent reports, they continue to campaign against physical and sexual violence toward children, carrying their daughter's memory into every room they enter and every petition they sign. The life without parole provision that Michel narrowly avoided has since been applied 11 times in France. Among those sentenced under it are Pierre Baudin, Michel Fournier, Salah Abdeslam, and Dabia Benkird. The law exists because of cases like Michel Sydor's, because a system that kept releasing a man who kept killing finally ran out of excuses. I'll head out now. We'll meet again in the next case. Till then, goodbye and good night.